The Old School is brought to you by Ahart Solutions, which provides school surveys and applied research. More information at ahartsolutions.com. Here we go.
And good day, good afternoon, good morning, good night, wherever you are, whenever you are. It is the Old School Podcast, a podcast about a host of things, not least of which the American education system, history, culture, travel, sports, philosophy, theology, and just ramblings of two old men with nothing better to do. With me in this endeavor is my good friend, Dr. Stephen Bourgeois. Good morning, sir.
Here, Miller. Good morning, good afternoon. We're actually doing this in the afternoon, so there's sun on you. Normally it's dark and shady and you're kind of grumpy, you haven't showered, and you seem animated this morning. Afternoon.
Well, man, I'm a little bit more awake than usual, but otherwise, still in fitting form. So,
Well,
and we are not alone.
we're not. I thought we might as well, we usually do playful banter to start out. We might as well involve our guest, now an old friend and a good friend and a current friend, Mr. Dan Album. And he's a CEO of Market Impact and a marketing advisor and author. And Dan, welcome to the Old School.
It's great to be in the Old School, Steve, and to continue our conversation that began so many decades ago in high school, and Ross, just connecting with you and talking about some things that are pretty important when it comes to relationships and really getting the most from our work and our life.
Love it. What do you think here, Miller? You're talking with somebody that actually is a witness to the fact that I did go to high school and I was in Oregon. You've hinted that I've made that up, you know?
But no, what my greatest concern about your childhood, particularly your adolescence, is that it was primarily spent on the tennis courts and in the practice room, and you didn't kiss a girl until you were 22 or something like that. That was my fear. So
Well, I can assure you that there wasn't much happening in the practice room but practicing.
Yeah.
did you
Yeah. Well,
see him out and about,
Steve
Dan?
was
Did
a
you see
good
him out and
student.
about in Eugene?
Yeah. I mean, we spent a lot of time, in that window of maybe 90 days when it wasn't raining to get out on those outdoor tennis courts. And Steve spent a lot of time out there, but I can vouch for the fact this was one smart cookie. He and I also, I think we engaged in some of the academics and working on some different things. And it might have even been AP history that there might have been some crossover there, but Steve was hitting the books for sure.
There you go. You see, Mr. Miller?
Well, nothing has changed, so you still hit the book, so it's good.
I always have trouble trusting anybody whose story stands up, you know? There I have
Well,
it.
speaking of books, let's launch into what Dan has written.
Well, that's exciting because I didn't tell you much about it, Ross. I thought we would let Dan tell about it. I kind of had an early portion of it, so I have a little bit of a head start. But why don't you give us the elevator speech, Dan, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, it's a really exciting point because as of this recording, we're one day away from the full release of my new book, which is The Giving Edge: Why Putting Others First Creates Your Greatest Advantage. And this book really came from me asking a fundamental question following decades of working very closely with senior leaders in some of the world's most accomplished technology companies, working some for a leading organization in the education space as well, of what kind of mindset ultimately, when we think about our leadership legacy, when we think about the quality of the and the power of the impact that we have in work and in life, what mindset really gives us the greatest chance to be able to accomplish that? And each of us has the power of an individual choice. We can choose to be consumptive. We can choose to be more oriented around taking and compiling resources in our belief that it's going to benefit and prompt us to be able to achieve more. Or alternatively, we can make the conscious choice to give first, to really put others first, and to give of our time, of our resources, of our talent, and we can lift others. And the argument that is made very compellingly in the book through the lives of 37 remarkable humans that show this is that by intentionally bringing a giving mindset every day gives you returns that are exponential when it comes to your long-term impact in the terms of the quality of your work and your life and the science behind that. But the dynamics of these real world stories just demonstrate time and time again that that is the right choice. And I'm thrilled to be able to share this with the world.
Think about it, just in US history alone, the amount of people going all the way back to George Washington and Benjamin Franklin who wrote about what it meant to be a good person, what it meant to, in a gentlemanly way. They were primarily focused on young boys at the time to approach other people. What is still a nagging lacking that we have that we still need this lesson repeatedly, throughout our history and today? I mean, what are we missing that still requires us to look at this in a kind of an in-depth sort of way?
Well, I think it all begins, Ross, with taking the moment to step back and be self-reflective and to put things in perspective. You know, we live in a society that is fueled by social media. It's fueled to some degree by attention deficit because we're bombarded with so much information. We've never had more access to real-time information in the media, video from around the world, what's going on in terms of politics, in terms of world affairs, in terms of wars, in terms of businesses that are either succeeding and are having record results or that are having terrible quarters and that are restructuring and downside. And so we're bombarded. But in this world of social media, there's this gravitational pull into being more inward focused. That is, let talk about myself, look at me, look at me, look at what I've done. And we're creating these optics of success that we want everyone else to buy into. How many followers do I have on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook? You know, all of these kind of me oriented metrics. But yet, in the midst of all that, as shown through these stories, when we take the time to step back, realize that our ability to actually lift others is one of the most amazing capabilities we have as human beings because of our unique intelligence, because of our unique skills that are very different than necessarily, you know, the other people, even in within your network, that we're uniquely able to help other people. And when we help other people, we're really shining the light back and we're helping ourselves to create greater measurable impact, something that will last and isn't lost in the transaction of a click on a LinkedIn post or a Facebook post. So that is really the thing that we need to remember and we really want to amplify through reading of these amazing stories in the book.
So that is something that I can never put my finger on what it is that makes me uncomfortable with LinkedIn, and I use it, and I think I benefit from it to some extent. But there is you called it optics of success,
Yes.
and so it's always an image of that leader around other people or out in public or something great happened to them, and so they're sharing it. There's this feeling of bragging a little bit, showing the world maybe that they're being generous. And if you look at the New Testament, for example, the idea of giving, where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and it's not, and you give uh, in secret, even. And that's very different than this public display of everything on media.
Right, right. And that is not to say that we shouldn't be proud of our accomplishments and we shouldn't share those accomplishments. That's not the message in the book because we all are able to achieve amazing things. We set goals and we're able to meet or even exceed those goals. Those should be celebrated. However, at the core of what really drives us in terms of the impact that we can create, let's not overlook that through lifting others, through helping others, through bringing our unique gifts and talents external to those very let's call them selfish metrics, that there's a whole nother pathway to create this amazing impact. And so the giving edge is really around recognizing that and being intentional to live your life that way and to make that a priority each and every day.
Think about the Australian concept of the tallest poppy, the notion that, no one should stand out or above anyone else. I'm not sure I buy that. However, I do see a merit in how we interact with our success, how we embrace our success, mainly by what we do with it. And it seems like that's kind of what you're getting at, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And part of that self awareness comes from being really honest and vulnerable and transparent when it comes to what we've learned, right? I was having a conversation recently, and the conversation was around the difference between failure and failing. And so if you have a fail and what you can actually take from any situation where you fall short of maybe some goal that you had, something that you hoped would be an outcome, and we've all had this experience in life where things just don't turn out the way that we had ideally wanted them to turn out. Now, this is another choice that we have. Are we going to come out of that situation bitter and focused on the failing, or I going to take the fail, and not view it as a failure because we're gonna apply learning from that that's gonna make us better, and that will achieve better outcomes down the road. And so a giving mindset, first and foremost, says that, "Hey, whatever I've accomplished as a leader of people, a leader in an organization, I'm not perfect, and there are things that I have had to learn, and I've had to apply to that learning." Well, the greatest gift that you can give anyone is to share that learning. It's not something to keep within yourself, but to share that learning to show people that you are less than perfect, that you're human just like them. And I found that teams respect leaders the fastest and the most deeply when they're able to show that vulnerability to say, I'm not perfect. I'm not always the smartest person in the room. I hope I've actually hired people that are smarter than me in some of these very specific areas because we're building team capability. Again, it's not about myself, it's about the team and it's putting others first. So there's a lot of these dynamics where we have to get real with ourselves about that lack of perfection. But again, so much of the gravitational pull in competing for the adulation out in that social media space is I've got to show that I've done more, and it pushes us into almost wanting to appear perfect. But let's be real, let's be human, and let's admit that vulnerability.
Reminds me, as what many life lessons do, reminds me of baseball. But the idea, there was a film called Mr. Baseball, and it's an American player playing in Japan.
Mhm.
And at one point, the Japanese manager says, "We're losing," and Tom Selleck, the American player, goes, "No, we're behind." And the kind of the switch on how we view things. Failure is an end stop. There's nothing to be gained
That's
further
right.
from that. But failing it represents an opportunity to do something
Right.
different, better. You know,
That's right. That's right. And there's a very valid perspective that says if we're not constantly failing, then are we really putting ourselves out there? Are we really taking the kind of risks that we should be taking that can really grow us or our teams? And again, um, how does that then fuel a mindset around putting others first and giving? They're very compatible. Be vulnerable, accept and be a very curious and a consistent lifelong learner, open yourself up to new possibilities. And all of that is consistent and will fuel the right kind of giving mindset, the giving edge that will allow you to achieve that maximum impact.
So if we look at both of your books, I've read your first book, The Impact Makers, and now The Giving Edge. There's a structure to both of them that they share as far as your methodology. You have a model and you have a lot of experience professionally, and you can tell the story, but you bring in experts in your network and people that you've gotten to know. So these are not casual acquaintances that you're citing in these, but people that you know and that you've spoken with. I think the book will come alive if you talk about, this specific one. What was your process? How did you collect the stories from 37 people? That's a big task.
Right. Right. Yeah, so, first and foremost, I wanted this to be reflective of in the sense that there are stories and learning to be had from people that come from a variety of different backgrounds and different career journeys. And so you'll see a very diverse set. So while there are very senior executive leaders that are part of these story sets, we also have conversations included in this book with people that are that have not achieved the C-suite, but are maybe in different roles. For example, an executive assistant to Steven Spielberg in the entertainment space, and kind of a decision that she made in terms of how could she give back and give meaning in an entirely different arena than being around motion picture and entertainment development. But again, from a career standpoint, she was not in the C-suite, but she was very close to people that were very, very powerful there. We have educators in this book that are telling the story of really being committed to helping students achieve more, and then going beyond that to helping educators be able to lift their students. So, helping the students to helping fellow educators, that kind of an arc. So, a lot of diversity there. We have people that have had careers in the technology space that are certainly been cutting edge in terms of the technology space, people that have been behind products that are manufactured or services. So we get a really wide range, people that have worked here in the United States, people that have global experience, that have worked within different cultures and have really seen how a giving mindset resonates even in places outside of their native United States. People that speak multiple languages. So it's a very diverse set, and that is first and foremost representative of humanity. And so I think it makes it very relatable to anyone that is going to be reading these stories.
A lot of times people, they'll read a book or they'll read someone's ideas and they'll think to themselves that these ideas are great, that they make sense, but oftentimes they don't know how to put it into action. Another tradition you're following here, I think about John F. Kennedy's Profiles in Courage, where he talked about individuals who kind of stood up for their beliefs and their ideas in the face of what may have seemed at the time insurmountable opposition. And it gave people a blueprint of how do you show courage? How do you show wherewithal in the face of opposition? It would seem like that this approach that you're taking gives people that roadmap, that blueprint to follow.
It should give them excitement and encouragement
Mm.
as to all of the possibilities of making that intentional choice. And the fact that this discovery across these 37 stories that each of these people made, there were points where they made that conscious choice to say, yeah, this is the right path, is not just coming from a place of really, really, just happy triumphs, that there's some tragedies, there's some real challenges and headwinds, and so often it's when we navigate through the storm that we get the greater and the deeper revelation than when we also achieve, we scale the mountaintop and we get it on that side. So, triumphs and tragedies, but all resulting in a commitment to give and to put others first, and now the returns that they're getting in their lives, in their work has never been greater. And so I think people will really resonate with that as just the realities of just how we live our lives.
So there are a lot of leadership styles, and I think this is more than a style. It's a life of leadership. But when we study educational leadership, particularly, they talk about transactional leaders, and they talk about transformational. That's an area I've done some writing in that. And then there are different styles of more autonomy supportive, even laissez-faire, kind of the continuum of that. I would say a lot of people consider themselves servant leaders, um, but it's easier to say than to be one because you're having to apply lots of different strategies but there's some core element to this, and maybe you could tell us what is that core that you know it when you see it, but what exactly
Yeah.
is?
Well, there's a couple of things, and this came up again in multiple instances across these very diverse 37 unique stories, which is one, true servant leadership as expressed through a giving mindset is not giving with a predetermined expectation of receiving something back.
Mm,
Now, the reality is, as these stories show, is that the returns come, but it's not as a result of framing your decision to give totally predicated on a preset expectation that I'm transacting, I'm giving, and Steve is giving me back, or Ross is giving me back. So, removal of the predetermined transactional mindset is kind of one key ingredient of authenticity in terms of the giving edge and the giving mindset. The other is that it's not just around self, it's projecting into what can I accomplish through the growth of other people. And so whether it's a mentoring, whether it's offering of advice, whether it's offering of emotional support, the fact is that there's an investment. I'm going to make an investment in terms of this experience. And that investment, I'm going to believe that that investment will return to me in terms of my own education, my own growth, perhaps through non contracted offer in return, but I'm not going to expect it on the front end. And so those are just two of the things, which is just is your mindset and your expectation when you go into an act of giving that really determines, is it authentic, or are you trying to turn this into kind of a prescripted transaction? And that's what we want to step away from. We want to go to something else that's a little more organic, a little more natural, that allows the giving edge really to take hold.
I'm curious that listening to you explain this, just I'm a former teacher, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself how often the conversation has gone to teach values, to teach morals, to teach virtues. The former Secretary of Education, William Bennett, wrote a whole entire book about a book of virtues, and there's always been this desire to want to bring across the core ideas. I'm just wondering, how easy is it to teach somebody these sorts of things, or is it kind of a does a person have to kind of go through a certain turmoil that will shape these ideas? Are people born like this? How does this develop? Is it something that you can even teach?
Yeah. Well, it certainly, you can prompt the kind of self awareness and deep introspection that is important to this. You can prompt that through the experience by sharing the experience of these stories and others. And so you expose people to that. And like anything, like we see something and it makes us stop and it makes us kind of think a little bit more deeply, how does that apply to me? So I do think those kinds of external introduction and communication that can actually prompt it, but sometimes it's just through the pain, or it's the reflection on something that really amazing happened, to say, well, what was the ingredient? What was really behind that? It's when someone helps us, when we're the beneficiary of someone with the giving edge doing something for us, the idea of paying it forward, right? We talk all about that all the time, and there was a movie many years back, right, that was all built around the premise of how cool it is to just keep paying, this chain of paying it forward. That can be a trigger as well to get more of that behavior. So I'm not a believer that this thing is either a natural, innate thing, you either have it or you don't. I think you can come to embrace it because it is back to our amazing power as humans to make a choice, an intentional choice. And as bad as our immediate world might be, maybe we're facing financial difficulties, or our career is kind of stalled out. It's not going the way we want to. Maybe we're not settled with our relationships. We have some really contentious relationships. All of that can be true. That does not prevent us from being intentional about how are we going to show up? How are we going to show up every day? What are we going to bring into our relationships? And so you take the proactive step rather than just reacting to what your environment and your world is going to give you. So that's the other important part of this is take that first step, be intentional.
So I'm always wondering about scale and scaling something like this through a company, particularly. Often we think of a principal at a school, a turnaround leader who goes in and has a leadership style, and they are the person who can implement it. But
Mhm.
when you're in an organization, I know Dan, you work with small and large
Yeah.
organizations where you want to instill something like this as part of the culture. Um, I assume that it can be done with some strategic leadership so that it makes its way throughout the organization. And I think I opened up a document that I have, and I know you had some influence on this. This is the organizational things that AHART looks at. And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
I think it kind of fits what you're getting at. We talk about system integrity, empowering leadership throughout the organization, something called internal service, which to me is the closest to servant leadership, collective efficacy, autonomy, belonging, and then overall satisfaction. But those are values throughout an organization. And I guess what I'm wondering is how can the leader, or the leadership team create a culture where this permeates everything?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two key ingredients if we're talking about wanting to create, to define, to
Mhm,
develop a culture, and then more importantly, and this is the harder one in so many conversations I've had with leaders on my podcast
mhm,
and in context of the book, the hardest thing isn't defining a culture and first implementing, it's how do I sustain it? How do I sustain it as people come and go over time, right? And that's going to happen. It's not going to be a static state. Well, there's something that I talked about in my first book, The Impact Makers. There's the create a clear, well understood construct for behavior in the organization. And in the first book, I talk about this concept of the triad, which is something that has been very successful for me in my own team leadership experience. And that's built on three principles. One, empowerment.
mhm.
So the idea that people are going to be given the latitude to actually bring their talent, their skills, their experience, and be given the responsibility and the opportunity to demonstrate that and not be helicoptered to death, for lack of a better term, in terms of them being able to do their work. The second aspect of the triad is transparency. That is transparency and communication, not just in sharing the good news, but in also being transparent as a leader in sharing the not so good news. Back to this idea of what do we learn and take from those challenges. And the third, which is really important, is accountability, which is the idea that if I'm empowered and if I've been given access transparently to all the good and the bad information, that I can be trusted to have total accountability for the responsibility that I've been given. See, there's this mistaken perception, and I've had these conversations many times about servant leadership, that an empowering versus a command control approach is, quote, soft leadership, that somehow it's lacking and it doesn't drive enough accountability. Actually, that's entirely opposite of the truth because in an environment where you are micromanaging and not trusting and helicoptering, you've basically given your team the permission to not be accountable, to not take responsibility because you know what? Dan's just going to come in at some point or at many points, he's going to kind of tell me what he wants and I'm just going to kind of do it. And so I really don't have to take the lead on this. I mean, I know if I mess up, Dan's just right there. He's going to be hovering and doing that. When you empower, you're transparent and you have that accountability greater than it's ever been before because that person knows that they are trusted and that they are clearly been given that responsibility. So accountability goes up. Well, that's the basis. So ultimately, in a giving organization, the second part of this is have the behaviors match the stated construct. So how leaders actually behave, not just what they say in town halls or one-on-one meetings, but do their actual behaviors match that. And leaders underestimate how much they're being watched in any organization. Your teams are looking at you all the time to see, do your actions match what the words are? And so when you're consistent, that's where you build trust, respect, and you really just blow performance through the roof. Where you have a misalignment, you're not walking the talk. That's where respect goes down, trust goes down, motivation goes down. So walk the talk, be consistent, and the triad is very aligned with a giving mindset and very foundational.
It's interesting when you see it in the realm of education because I went the first few schools I taught in, it was very much that helicopter, that kind of top-down type of structure. And there really was no room for other people to take initiative to,
Right.
to kind of go along, to try to create something new. And then one of the last schools I was in, it was like it was very freeing in a sense that, you know, I go back to the notion that the right to do something doesn't mean it's right to do. A lot of times leaders feel like they have to have meetings. And one of the things that, when I came into this last school, I was expecting a meeting and they're like, well, there's no reason to have one. Just you know what you're doing, get to it, make it happen. And so this notion of being allowed to and given the freedom to create on your own, to develop, to, take initiative on things, it's a pretty powerful feeling. We see it also with regards to, unfortunately, I think education has a very deep love affair with rubrics, and I think the
Mhm.
problem with rubrics is that, and you could see it if you take a look at the development of rubrics over the last 20 years. They've become almost like legal documents, and it gives the students no room to go and no room to create. And it's one of those things that you can see it having an impact on what they do and how they do it.
Yeah. And there's another element when we're talking about these different leadership styles, and the more commanding and controlling that you are, if you choose that path, there's this aspect of creating fear in the organization, fear across your team, and research time and time again in looking at the effect of creating fear has been pretty consistent in saying that you might be able to get some results, some improved results in the short run. Typically, you see a very near-term reaction, and people are just they're so fearful that it's just a forcing function into them doing stuff, and you might get that project done faster. That particular project at the time, you're really leaning in, but that consistently over time, what happens is there's this post-traumatic cycle where people are then so overwhelmed and so disillusioned by working in a fear-based environment that inevitably their motivation and their performance erodes over time. And so you get a short-term, maybe a singular pop, but you don't sustain it. And it actually goes the other way. Whereas if we talk about an empowering, more trusting servant leadership, you're able to create a more consistent, long term loyalty to the organization, better satisfaction, higher satisfaction within the teams that you're leading, and just more consistent long term results. So it's a better path.
I think it's a important point that we all learn from bad leadership, and we've all experienced it. I know, Dan, you have in one of your books, actually, you write it
Yeah.
about, and Ross and I have shared leaders, and um, and that idea of a toxic environment. It's not always toxic, It's there, and I mean, I think if anybody's gone through it, you feel like sometimes you can walk on water. You're doing great. You think they're going to have a parade for you, and then about 10 days later, you wonder if you're gonna get a pink slip, and
Right.
it changes. It's almost like this 10-day cycle, and I know of companies that they try to promote this idea of competition internally and keep people on their toes, and it's a terrible idea for a leader because you're right, people need consistency, and they don't need to feel like they're walking on water, but they need to feel comfortable so that they can take some risks, and that they're not gonna be looking for a job, and that it wears people out. That's how people burn out.
Yeah. I mean, teams that are consumed by fear,
Mhm.
that can be very overwhelming. It creates this type of catharsis. And so what happens is there's almost this mechanism of shutting down, which means that I'm going to basically try to do so little
Mhm.
and create such little movement. I'm using that in kind of a analogic
Right.
sense, that okay, I'm just surviving. I'm not thriving, I'm surviving. And as a leader, to create the real positive impact that is going to be your legacy, don't we want it to be something more than just surviving? We want it to be thriving.
Mhm.
And so we can do that through a giving mindset, the giving edge, which is totally aligned with servant leadership.
So there's a upper management and there's sort of this middle management that can create the toxicity as well. Often, at least in my theoretical construct, it comes from the top and it permeates all the way down. But a middle manager can exude control, and create that, and it doesn't take much, but somebody who often they learn from the leader and they try to apply it now as well because maybe they're not charismatic, but when you see it and you're managed that way, it's really difficult. You're stuck, and often that person, though they're not a great leader, they could be a very good politician. They're good about selling themselves and they're untouchable. And so then you have a problem.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, larger organizations, there's always an element of certainly of positioning and politicking, and that's never going to be eliminated. But even at the middle leadership layer, even if you've got some toxicity at the executive level,
Yeah.
there still can be a buffer, and so teams can benefit from an enlightened leader,
Right.
maybe the director level that says, "You know what? I'm gonna choose a different path."
Mhm.
And I've been in organizations where there are times I felt I was a bit of a buffer, for my team, frankly, where, I was trying to give them, the benefit of an environment that was not necessarily consistent with the behavior of everyone, on the executive team. And so, but there's a real appreciation and trust that happens and respect that happens there too when they see that you're going to be courageous, stand by your values, have their backs as a team, and really make that commitment. So it can actually, while not necessarily an easy thing to kind of be in that mode, it can also be very powerful when it comes to the kind of relationship you're building with your teams.
Think about something that I was talking to Steve about not too long ago. Bill Walsh, the 1970s, 80s head coach of the
Yeah.
49ers, he worked with a gentleman named Dr. Harry Edwards to kind of create
Hmm.
a questionnaire that was designed to highlight people who had certain traits. And it was designed to, create people that did not need over direction, but would have the ability and would have the talent to be able to do something if left to their own devices, if given the freedom to do so. And there's a famous picture of his team practicing, and Bill Walsh is just laying on the grass with his hands behind his head like this, and just because he knows everything is going the way it's supposed to because
Right.
he's picked right people. I'm wondering, given how successful it is astounding sometimes why more people don't do it. Is this an individual decision? Is this an institutional structure that keeps it from being able to move in this way? What keeps so many people from turning away from so many examples of how this could work correctly?
Yeah, I think there's just institutional structures or processes that are in place that unfortunately kind of dissuade or demotivate people from wanting to pursue this. If I'm investing in an empowering and putting others first mindset, but I'm not being rewarded for that, rewarded in the sense of, is that being recognized? Am I being given positive feedback by my leadership around that? That can be, again, staying that course, that can be tough sometimes for some people. It's like, we all want to be there's a natural human element to feel like we matter and that we're being recognized. And if we're not getting that because the institution is simply not putting a priority on that, so I'm kind of a bit on an island. To me, that's a real test, right? It's like a physical and a mental test. How long can I continue to do this? So some people can kind of drift away from that. perhaps I only learned in every experience that I had was through a more command control, title oriented structure. And so I'm just the next cog in that machine. When I get my title, then I'm just going to continue and perpetuate. Some people that fall into that trap. Um, what who am I looking to for inspiration in kind of shaping my leadership approach? And maybe I'm seeing the optics of what people are presenting through their advice, through social media or whatever means, or seminars or what have you, or a book that I read. I can be influenced by someone else's pathway. So it's a combination. It's not one single thing, but it can be many things that kind of shape ultimately where someone decides to go in terms of the leadership, which is why I'm so motivated to at least be able to share the voices and the experiences of these 37 humans to at least compete for space in the minds and the hearts of people to make the right choice.
So from what I gather, there are some similarities with these 37 people, and even the little bit that I read as a preview, they overcame some things. They had difficult circumstances
Absolutely.
out of the gate, and so they shared that ability to uh, work through it, but also maintain their character and their sense of self, and not shut off, like you said. Is that something that you think is the case across these? Because I'm trying to get at how do you develop that? Well, maybe you come by it honestly by having gone through some things.
It's the life experiences, Steve. It absolutely is. And whether you're essentially kind of a latchkey child, a child of color in an all white community in the upper Midwest that is dealing with a lot of traumatic racial issues, growing up in that environment, and for her to be able to make the commitment that I'm going to go into true causes that are going to help people be better in terms of their human relationship and interaction. So that's just one high level example of one of those challenges. Someone who's been laid off and gone through a tortuous job search for 14 to 16 months trying to find that next opportunity and then invest time in her own schedule to post videos to support other people going through the same thing. As painful as her own experience is, she's going to go outside of that and think about other people and how can she lift and do that. Another example of being able to apply the giving edge. So, yeah, it's not just the triumphs, it's some of these tragedies and some of these challenges. They can make us more resolute in terms of how we can actually create a better life by helping others.
Mhm.
It's reminiscent of, William James, the psychologist, talked about the idea that we get born a second time. I don't want to let anyone be confused by the religious implications of, of that, what that term can mean. But he thought that when people go through these crises, usually crises of identity, they come out stronger as a result of it because they've had this second birth, and this second birth has been forged in steel, and it has allowed them to be able to handle anything that comes their way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also the experience, not just being by yourself, but actually being in a situation where you are working as part of a team. And this can happen certainly in business, it can happen in the athletic world. And one of the stories that I tell in The Giving Edge refers to the wisdom of a man named Casey Jones. Now, Casey Jones played on multiple championship teams for the Boston Celtics back in the 1960s and 50s. Ultimately was a coach that won an NBA championship. So he had, both perspective as player and as a coach. And the person that I'm profiling in the book, as part of their experience, had an opportunity to work with Casey on an advertising shoot. And he stopped and he said, Casey, what was the difference? What made those teams so special that were able to win those championships and be just so exceptional? Was it that you were playing together as a team? That you were playing better with each other? And Casey said, no, actually, it's because we were playing for each other. And so the idea that we share this common goal, this common vision of making this world better, how do we work with other people? And we can't work effectively with other people, I believe, unless we actually consciously understand the needs and we care about other people and we put other people up before our own selfish needs first. And that's how we create this idea of playing for each other. And so that was an interesting outcome of the interviews for the book. I thought that was a really powerful story, just a subtle shift in how we think about the idea of how we work and perform as a team with others.
So, I don't know if you knew this, but I was a Celtic fan, and I was because Danny Ainge played for them.
Yes,
He
that's right.
went to school where before I moved over to your school, and so we knew
Yeah,
coming up and went to some practices with Danny Ainge, but there's something about that team, with Larry Bird, Kevin McHale,
yeah,
Robert Parrish, Dennis Johnson, that they valued the assist, and it's not just a symbolic thing, but they got excited about passing and setting those up, and so they were always aware of that, and it was about winning, but the assist was. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a team that would open up the court like they did, and it was beautiful, and I think that something about Casey Jones is that behind the scenes he wasn't a real vocal guy, he didn't make big
yeah,
speeches, but he probably behind the scenes said he make the pass.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when we play for each other, now we've invested in each other, we trust each other,
Mhm.
and it makes all the difference in the world.
It wasn't as if Larry Bird was some sort of wallflower, who did not have a strong personality or a strong belief in himself, but the belief was more in the team and what the team could achieve. The finding the joy in the success of others, the people around you. It really says a lot about that team.
But he did want the ball down the stretch. We're finding him. He would tell you about that too. Wow. Well, this has been great. Dan, is there anything else you want to tell our folks who are listening? I hope you'll share this with your group of listeners. They can hear us, but we will put the links and everything else here, for them to find the book, and we'd be glad to share market impact and anything else you want to leave with us.
Yeah, the book is gonna be available wherever books are sold beginning on June 9th. So go out, check it out, and really see the lives of 37 amazing humans, and by making the right intentional choice, you can have an incredible impact in making your work and your life as tremendous as it can be and that it deserves to be. So I'm really appreciate the opportunity, Steve, to talk with you and Ross and to share the message of the giving edge.
Well, it's great timing. We're glad we could do it.
Right before Father's Day. So if you're looking for that gift, then this could be the one.
There you go. Wonderful. Well,
Uh,
thanks, Dan. Thanks. And again, I hope we get to talk more on this podcast as well.
Looking forward to it.
And with that, we shall say adieu, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Wiedersehen, Herr Miller. And thanks again, Dan.